Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah. Okay, so you guys are going to get sick of me talking already. I'm sorry.
Never.
Thank you. I brought my mother this evening in order that both the girls and you parents can actually hear a survivor. This is something that, especially where I work in Yad Vashem, we really try to do and to continue to do as long as we can. We have filmed, besides what Spielberg did in Yad Vashem itself, a lot of survivors in a lot of different languages, so that their story can continue to be told. The girls have heard my mother's story from the vantage point of going through the museum and seeing artifacts and seeing things that touched her life and mine as well. I would like to introduce my mother now, who's going to give you a picture of basically her life before, because as I told you girls in the museum, in order to understand the magnitude of the loss, we have to understand what the Jews had before the war. What was their life like? What was their family life, their professions, everything that surrounded them and that they lived with. Because that way we can understand what they lost. So I'm going to introduce my mother. From there she'll go on to be telling parts of her story. You can ask questions at the end, and I'm sure you'll all get a lot out of it. My mother is a Holocaust educator for many years, as opposed to many of my friends' parents who never liked to speak, never liked to tell. I always knew my parents' story, and as I grew with the years, I learned more and more items that just interested me and had a big effect on me. So I hope she's going to share that with you tonight. Thank you all very much. And I'm going to give you Rebbetzin Wagner. She is going to sit because it's easier for her. If you can't hear, you can come a little closer.
Yeah. I hope you can hear me, and I apologize for sitting, but it's a little easier for me. Now, if I'll tell you that I was your age at the time when the war broke out, so you'll understand how old I am, and you'll realize why I'm not standing up. Besides that, I had a little accident lately, so it's a little hard for me. I grew up in a town, not a big place, but there were 10,000 Jews living there. So you can say the majority of the town was Jewish. The stores were all Jewish. Shabbos, there was no store open. Everything was closed. And there were about 2,000 non-Jews, which were Ukrainians and Poles, because my town was quite close to the Ukrainian-Russian border. So we had people that were either Ukrainian or Poles. My father was the rabbi of the town, and that was something that gave me a lot of pride, but also kept me very tight of what I can do, because if I did something that people didn't like, they would say, the rabbi's daughter, how can you do that? So, but it was a big honor. My father was very famous, a very learned man, and he gave a lot of attention to me as a young child. He liked nature. He would walk with me and explain me everything that's growing and what it is. By the way, our town was beautifully located. It had a river going around the town. There were a few bridges, and higher up were mountains with forests that were gorgeous. So actually I heard that in World War I, which I don't remember, they intended to make it into a special place, like a summer resort, for the beauty of the town. And I must say I felt very comfortable there. I did not go to school. Should I tell that to the girls? My father felt that I shouldn't attend the public school where religion was part of the curriculum. They were hanging all over crucifix pictures. Every morning there were prayers, non-Jewish prayers, of course. So my father was able, being he was an authority, he was the rabbi of the town, he was able to get permission that I can study privately, come once a year for exams, and get my certificate for the year. So that was my schooling. Besides it, years later, there was a Beis Yaakov that moved into our town too, and that was an hour a day, because there was one teacher and she had to deal with different age groups. So she gave every age group 1 hour. But it was very intensive learning. And I sometimes listen to my grandchildren who go here to Beis Yaakov, and I tell them, oh, that's not what we did. We really worked hard. But it was beautiful. I enjoyed that because not having gone to public school, socially it was a little hard. But friends, I had friends, but it wasn't the same like you see them every morning. On the other hand, I could stay in bed a little longer. I could do my reading, which I love, and all in Polish, of course. I loved the Polish literature. And that's how life went on. Now, that was up till the breakout of World War II. We were in a resort place. We came back, and it was already dark at the train station, and there were already policemen and soldiers marching back and forth, and we knew that this is going to be war. This is no more a joke. The windows were all covered with dark paper. So it started a new era in my life. From the spoiled girl, I was the only one of my mother, because my father had remarried, so he had all the sons, but my mother had only me. So I had to get into the new rhythm of life. First of all the banks closed up, so you couldn't get money. Number two, all the stores closed up. They couldn't get any things to sell. And we really subsided on what the villages would bring to town and sell. There were vegetables, some fruit, but it started a very difficult period. But at the same time, being young, I took it in good stride. I still had all my friends, and Beis Yaakov was closed. But we would meet, we would study, we would tell each other all kinds of things. But the fact was that our first experience was, for 2 years, we were occupied by Russia. You know it maybe from history, I hope, that the first 2 years, from 39 to 41, Poland was divided into two parts. One part was Russian and one part was German. And we were on the Russian side. Now, being on the Russian regime was also no picnic. It was very difficult, especially for religious people. You know, they did not respect the authority of a clergyman They closed a lot of synagogues. They really made living as a Jew very difficult. And you don't know these things until you experience them. But it was very difficult for us. So for 2 years we suffered under the Russians. What happened next was even worse. The Germans fought with the Russians. They came in and conquered that part of Poland, and now we were under German jurisdiction. And that was really the worst. Because the Germans came there to eradicate all the Jews. That was their aim. And they did it in different ways. First they called some young people to come to work, supposedly, and they took them to the forests and shot them, which we found out because some non-Jews noticed it, they saw it happening. And they were so, the Germans had such ideas that it's unbelievable. They made every of these young men write a postcard to his parents that he is fine, he's getting enough food, he has a place to sleep, he's with his friends, and they mailed that out after they shot all these 200 young men. And that was, for my father, it was such a shock, because he said, I knew these people, I was their moil, I was at their bar mitzvah, I was at their wedding, and now where are they? So my father got sick, and in a way, he didn't perish by the Germans directly, but it definitely was the reason he got sick and he passed away. Now, I remained with my mother. However, I know Malki likes to hear the story of, yeah, I'll tell it. Now, when I was about 17, anyone here 17? I'm not giving I'm not giving you suggestions because it wasn't really practiced too much. But being my father wasn't that young, and I was the youngest child, and he wanted to see me married. So there was a young man in a big city, which is called Lvov now in Russian. It was Lemberg in Yiddish. It was a big city settled by Jews. Somehow a young man from there decided to come with his father. We met, and we didn't know each other for too long. How long, Malki?
About 45 minutes.
No, a little more. A few hours we were sitting and talking. And after that we had an engagement, proper engagement ceremony, with Noam that my husband wrote by himself. He was a big Talmud Chochem. He already had, by that age, was 18. He had already smich. So he wrote it out. And he went back to Lvov, where his family lived. I mean, no one spoke about a wedding at that point. It just wasn't feasible. So that's the story of me in Poland before the Germans started what they did. Now, we were not allowed to walk out in the street. There was curfew from 8 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon. Not that we were allowed, but after that, no one could show themselves. There were soldiers around, policemen, German policemen, and they would arrest these people. So we were stuck completely in the house. The rations that we got were so poor that people really died of hunger. The only things that we could get were when the people from the villages brought some things, and they didn't want money, they wanted things. Give us a dress, give us something from the house, piece of furniture. So we did that in order to keep alive. Besides it, they made us move from our apartment, which was a nice apartment, and we had to move to a place, that was all we found, that was a carpentry. It was a big room, probably almost like this, but it wasn't very livable. But we had no prayer, and we moved there, because that was in the section where Jews could live. There was not an exact ghetto, but there was a section where Jews were permitted to live. So this is the story that I went through, and I still didn't forget it, because you can't forget a thing like this. And this is what I taught my children. Now, I felt all the years, and my friends who were also Holocaust survivors would not tell their children what happened. They would keep it as a secret. They had their reasoning. They don't want to burden their children with such horror stories. And I was feeling that that's part of my life. My children have to know. So here's my daughter, who knows the story that I tell. She came down with me to the basement to wash the laundry. She loved to put in the quarters, and she had a doll in her hand. And the lady, a very nice neighbor, she meant it well. She says, "Oh, what a beautiful doll. Your grandma must have bought it for you." And she was 3 years old. She says, "I have no grandma. The Germans killed my grandma." So they knew it from childhood on. We never felt that we should keep it as part of our life. They have to know why everybody has grandmas and grandparents. We lived in the town. We had no relatives. I used to complain I have no place to go for Hanukkah geld. There's no cousins, there's no one. But I still must say that I was a happy child, because I enjoyed my father's care, my mother's care, and friendship with other girls my age. Even though they all went to public school and I didn't, but we kept the friendship. Then when the Beis Yaakov started in our town, that was an afternoon school, an hour for each group, because there was only one teacher. So she would teach from 2 to 3 and 3 to 4, 4 to 5, but she was excellent, and she really gave us so much material, as if we would have gone there for the full day. And we even put on shows. I have a picture here of the Yosef Spiel, they call it. And Joseph and his colored garment. And it was done beautifully, really professional. So the Beis Yaakov was a big thing. We would meet Friday night, and we would learn songs and dance. And we tried to enjoy as much as we could our young years.
Tell about the time you were arrested later on, under the Germans.
Oh, I am not by at the
So
Germans.
you started with the Germans already?
Yeah. All right. When I was arrested, that was an experience that I can't believe it happened to me, but it did. It's good I told it to my daughter, so she remembers. I was just walking out from the house, and an Ukrainian young man with a rifle, because the Germans gave them already rifles. They were going to include the Ukrainians into their regime. He told me, walk. I walked, I listened. My parents didn't know that I walked out. It was early in the morning. I just went out on the balcony. And I spent the night in jail. But it was really a terrible experience. I never know what jail is, but this was a terrible experience. The people that were there were, they weren't Jews, and they were really the lowest of the lowest class. But later on, my mother persuaded the president of the Judenrat, of the Jewish community, to come with him, and they got me out. But one night I slept there on the floor, of course. So these were my teenage years. Now, we knew already that the Germans are taking people to concentration camps. We knew that they massacre a lot of Jews. And everybody was trying to do their best to escape it. So first of all, we built places to hide in. But the Germans became clever with this, and they went around and they found it. And they had some help from the local population, Poles and Ukrainians, would tell them, see that hidden window? There are Jews there. And they would gather us together. So the big axia, what they called, was 3,000 people. They brought us all to the town square. Everybody had to sit down. You weren't allowed to pick up your head. You had to, if you picked up your head, you got it over your head. And they were walking around. Not even that many Germans, but the fear that we had was such that we knew we in their hands. And they collected us all there. That was the big axia. And they made us march up to the train station. Our train station was about a mile away from town. We marched, I think, 6 or maybe 8 in every row. And we knew already that it doesn't bode anything good because, people started understanding that the Germans are here to eradicate the Jewish population. So I was taking up to the train, my mother, and as Malgi told you, my chosen, and we were marching. And when we came to the train station, they started selecting. The young men who were still able to work were put on one side. The other ones were all together. Old people, children, mothers with children, old men, old women. That was all together. They pushed us into a train wagon. I don't know, must have been 300 people. We couldn't sit. We could stand just squeezed in. And we were standing there, the train started moving. We didn't know where they are taking us, because at that time we were not so aware of the concentration camps. We knew they are there to finish us up, but we didn't know that there's Bergen-Belsen, there's all these terrible places that we saw in Poland now yet. And we just marched to the train station. When we came there, against selection, they took all the young men on the side, they put them in one part of the train, only men. And the others was all together into the other one. You absolutely couldn't, that's how we had to stand. Couldn't sit, you couldn't breathe. By that time, I became very brave. I said to myself, I'm not going to give in. And I was thinking about jumping out from the train. Now these were cattle cars, you'll see it when you go to Poland, where the windows are all the way on top. So you had to find a way out to reach these windows. And the windows had some wooden planks and barbed wire over it. But somehow we broke it down. I think there was one more girl after me. And I stood up on a big barrel that they gave us with water when we came in, which was empty by that time. With all these people, they needed a drink at least. I stand up on that barrel and I said to myself, I have to take a chance. And that's when I was 17, 18 years old. And I did jump out from the running train. I wasn't even aware that you should jump in the direction that the train is going, you're backwards. I never did it before, but I just jumped out. And it was night. I landed in a field of corn, which was high enough to cover me. The train kept going. And the next thing I heard were two men talking Yiddish walking by. So I figured they must be Jews. Sure enough, they were from our town. And they said they know the way to go back to town. Because the Germans' tactic was to make an action, to get together people, take them to concentration camps, and then like for 2-3 weeks, it was quiet. And when people didn't hide anymore, then they got them again. So anyway, those two men led me too, and it took hours and hours to get back to my town. Now, I wasn't even aware how far it was, because I was on the train and the train went fast. But it was, we walked for hours and hours in the middle of the night. When I came back home, I found only my brother, who was hidden by some non-Jewish family. He survived with his wife and child. He survived then, but he didn't survive afterwards. And I stayed with them. Now, next thing was, where do I go from here? We knew already that they will be making these, getting people together and sending them off. By that time, we were well aware of it. So the next thing was, Jews are not stupid people. We will get papers that documents, false documents, of course, that will tell that we are not Jewish. But to get it, first of all, you had to have money to buy it. And you had some priests. The priests in Poland were the ones who kept the birth and death rate. So they wrote it. I have it in Latin. I have it here. It's all in Latin. And they gave me another name. I wasn't anymore my own. And with this document, I felt I'll be able maybe to travel to a city where no one knows me and maybe survive.
Sure. How did you buy it? You had no money. What did you buy it with?
Oh, with my engagement ring, that. Thank God I had that. Yeah. You had to buy it. I mean, there was a market for it. You had to know the priest. You had to know how to get to him. So anyway, there was, at that time, my future husband's sister lived already in my town with a non-Jewish family taking care of their children. But they knew that she was Jewish. They kept her because the husband of that family was not Jewish.
Was Jewish.
He was Jewish. So they wouldn't harm her either. And so I used to come and see her. And I said to this lady, is there any way that I could get somewhere away from my town? And my town was almost on the Russian border, which going to the Poland would have been a long trip. So she said, yes, she has a sister in Warsaw. She's going to write to her sister that there's a young girl here who will be a very good governess for their child. They were in business, the husband and wife, and she's going to bring her. And she even went with me, I must say. It was this time of the year, the holidays of theirs. But she took me, and I came there. By that time, I had already a passport, what they called, identification paper, and I had a birth certificate, which is in Latin, which I have here. The girls will be interested, or the parents, I will show it to you. I don't understand everything in it either, it's Latin, but it was a means to survive. And that's how I landed to Warsaw. I spent in Warsaw about a year and a half. And then there started another war between the Germans and the Russians. The Russians were moving towards Warsaw. So there was another war. I went through a few of them. And the people that I stayed was already a different family, lived a little outside of the town of Warsaw. But one day the Germans came, they burned all the houses in the street, the Polish houses. And they put everybody on trains. But they didn't take them to a concentration camp because these were Poles, they were not Jews. They put us on that train, and these people that I worked for were elderly people, so they let them go. They came from some village originally. They let them go there. And here I was left with my papers and nothing much else. I had no money, but I had to fight for my life. And from then on, it was a constant fight. We didn't want to be recognized. We always checked and looked behind us. Somebody maybe is going that will tell the Germans, oh, this one looks like a Jew. But they said that I had perfect Aryan features. I was blonde and blue eyes and light skin. So in a way it helped at that time. But I don't know how, but I still have that Ken Carter, which was the identification paper. I have the birth certificate, and I even have that I came from a city which wasn't Jew either, and I lived there in a building, so they had to give me a certificate that I left, and then that I came to Warsaw, and I got there a new certificate. And they were everyday things. I could sit and tell you for hours and hours, but it's I know my daughter's waiting for the happy ending. The girls do. Oh, you speak for the girl. Anyway, my husband was hidden by those people who took me to Warsaw. He was hidden over a toilet which was built outdoors, very high, so they made a partition. He stayed there for 8 months, in the cold of the winter, in the heat of the summer. He couldn't sit straight. He couldn't lie down. He was all squashed there. But, you know, when one is in danger, you do a lot of things. And I say my husband, at that time he was my fiancé. So after the war ended, I landed in a town where there was already a small Jewish community of refugees, survivors. It's called Celle, and it's right next to Bergen-Belsen. Everybody heard of Bergen-Belsen. There was the infamous camp too. So anyway, I just had no hopes that I'll ever find him. You couldn't travel freely. You know, you were still not free, completely free. But my husband was very good at it. He did travel, and he went from place to place and looked up lists of survivors, Jewish and Polish, knowing my Polish name. And finally, he landed in Bergen-Belsen, and he met a friend of his, childhood friend. And his friend said, it's Erev Shabbos, stay with us over Shabbos. He was already married. And Sunday we'll see what we can do. He had a car at that time. And he took my husband Sunday to a place where I stayed. And he brought my fiancé with him. I don't have to tell you that. I don't even have to describe. Can you imagine these emotions after a few years, not knowing one about the other, we are alive, not knowing where one is now and one is later. And my husband traveled a lot, different places, but he didn't find me. But at that time, this friend took him to Celle, which was right near Bergen-Belsen, and there was a rabbi involved, right? A rabbi who wanted to marry me off to somebody, and somehow he got through to my husband, and he says, I know where she is. And that's how we got married. We got married in Salzburg, Austria, because my husband had one brother who survived and lived in Salzburg. So we were for a while there. And then we did a lot of traveling around the world. The Wandering Jew. We were in Belgium. We were in Bolivia. My son was born in Bolivia. And then we went to California. And finally we landed in Brooklyn, where Malky was born. So that's, very short from what I can tell. But I don't want to keep everybody waiting more. But the book tells a little more in detail. And that's from Yad Sarah. They sent somebody to interview me, and they made up a book. They placed it in many places here, and I gave it to all my grandchildren. It was a Hanukkah gift. Now, I'll be open for questions. I would like you to ask some things that you probably didn't catch up with what I said. Yes?
This is a very simple one, but when your fiance, did he know he was coming to see you, or was he surprised too? Did the friend know that you were there?
No. I'm very glad you asked, because I'm skipping a lot. I could keep you here a whole night. There was a rabbi in Bergen-Belsen who used to come into this town of Celle, where I lived, and I started a Beis Yaakov, and there were other Jewish girls, and this rabbi wanted to marry me off to somebody. And I told him, I have a fiancé, and I still feel that he's alive after all these years. So I said, give me at least 6 months, we'll see. Now, my husband met this rabbi in Bergen-Belsen, and my future husband told him that he was engaged to the rabbi of my town. I come, by the way, from Buchach. Anyone heard that name? Malky?
Well, they should know it from their Lashon, but
That's what I think. Agnon.
Agnon's birthplace.
Agnon was born in our town. Not in my time, I'm not that old. But this rabbi gave the lead, and the friend that he stayed with took him Sunday morning to see me. And I was standing there with my sister-in-law, future sister-in-law, who was already married. And she had her husband was in the English Air Force. He enlisted in Palestine, in Israel, and he landed there. And he had a friend, and we were standing and talking, and this friend of my husband's comes over, and he was very, very smart. When I think back how he used psychology, which he never learned, I'm sure, he said, I knew your sister-in-law, I knew your brother. They used to come to Lemberg, to Lvov, and I even knew your husband. He all spoke in the past tense. Oh yeah, he's alive. He's in Germany. Oh, wait a minute, he's already here in Austria. He's traveling. And then he said, go outside. He's outside before the entrance door. And there he was. And that was years.
Any other questions? Anybody else have any questions?
Yes.
I mean, I could be here all night asking questions. Very interesting and appreciated. How many times have you been back to Poland?
Poland. My mother has been back 6 times. She goes with the Heritage group.
Oh, you mean now?
Now,
Yeah,
since then.
I really always said I don't want to see that country, I don't want to go. But I learned that it has a lot of chinuch in it. So I'm going almost every year, right?
6 years with seminary and yeshiva students that come from America, and before they go back home for Pesach, they go to Poland for a week.
So I was a few times, yeah. Oh,
6.
5, 6?
6.
I never believed I would go. I did go once to my town, and I took my 3 children with me, and I couldn't recognize it. They really demolished so many things. I couldn't find the street where I lived, and it's a small town. We found the Agnon Street. They have an Agnon Street near the library, but they don't say he was Jewish. They make him for an Ukrainian.
Writer.
Famous writer who got the Nobel Prize, but they wouldn't say. But I can say from the experience of those few years that the Poles are now a little more lenient. My son went quite a number of years ago with his yeshiva, and he said that you could touch the anti-Semitism around you. And now they're very polite, because I think it serves their purpose. They make money. They want tourists. Yeah?
Did anyone else survive in your family except for yourself?
No. No one. I was the only one. I had a sister who was married to a rabbi too. They shot him because he was a military rabbi also, chaplain. And they had children, 2 little girls and a boy. Now my brother, who lived in my town, went to some non-Jew who was hidden by him and was killed by him with his wife and child. And then my youngest brother went to Lvov. And I don't know exactly what happened. We had no information. But it seems that, we know that he didn't survive. We would have known. That was my youngest brother. Yeah, it's very... Malki used to say, before Hanukkah, she says, all my friends go to their aunts and uncles for Hanukkah geld. I have no one to go for Hanukkah geld. She grew up without any family besides her parents, and that was it.
I think that we could end by saying my mother's greatest revenge, even though she didn't say it, but she says it to me very often, is the over 64 great-grandchildren that she has today. I think she did.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I just want to,
I hope you found it interesting.
sure
But
did.
that is my life story.
we sure did. I want to thank you so much